Welcome back. Friends are always welcome here. We're kind of a tight-knit group. I'm Dr. David Merker, Extension Forester with the University of Tennessee, and this is Back Porch Forestry. Unfortunately, today we're back in the man cave. It's just a little bit too cold outside for my laptop computer. Tree planting is a topic that is of interest to most everyone. Who can argue against the concept of planting trees? And that's the subject of today's Back Porch Forestry session. Now, this is not urban tree planting that I'm talking about, a yard tree. This is forestry. We're planting large tracts of land into a stand of timber with the purpose of someday harvesting these trees to generate revenue. And that's what we'll be discussing today is planning and planting a tree planting project. So let me share my screen. And we'll get started. Back porch forestry. These began during the COVID-19 outbreak and have sort of continued. I appreciate your support that you've given over these many months. So let's jump into this. Planning and planting a new forest. I want to give thanks to the Tennessee Department of Agriculture, Division of Forestry. Many of the slides that you'll be seeing today were actually developed by them, and I've kind of added my own touch to it, but I want to thank the Division of Forestry, a great partner. I'm going to go through a number of steps, essentially, just ABC type steps. And we want to begin first that if you're going to establish a young forest, if you're going to plant a forest, you want to begin with professional forestry assistance. And so seek the assistance maybe of several, and I've listed some here. Each state will have a state forest agency, and they're a good initial contact. They oversee cost share programs and can develop tree planting plans and just guide you in the early steps. Of course, there are consulting foresters that might actually assist in the planting itself, carrying out the operation. And wood industry employs people that assist landowners as well with tree planting projects, particularly in the pine industry. So begin with a professional forester. What your professional forester is going to do then is to develop a tree planting plan. And of course, plans can be general or specific, but if your tree planting at all involves cost share assistance, they're going to require a pretty detailed plan. Now, I can't go through all these check marks here, but I have highlighted a few of them just to bring out the importance in your tree planting plan. It begins with site analysis. And so you have to know the area that's going to be planted, and that includes the soil characteristics. How much is it typically sand, silt, clay, poorly drained? Is it dry? And then natural features of the land. Is it south facing? What's the aspect? In other words, it might dry out more if it's a south facing slope as opposed to northeast slope. Climate patterns and biotic factors, all sorts of things. Are deer likely to be a problem as well? In which case a fence might be necessary. The plan also will include such things as site preparation. What's needed to get this site up to par so it can be planted, which could include herbicide treatments, burning, clearing, maybe disking. And then the planting scheme itself. What's the spacing going to be? What species are you going to plant? Are they mostly white oak, or are you going to go with conifers? Hardwoods or conifers, and what's their spacing? 8 by 8, 8 by 10, 10 by 10, 12 by 12. And then the planting method as well. We'll discuss that, but will it be machine planted or hand planted? And then I did mention, as you look all the way down to the bottom, of course, there's cost share assistance to assist in tree planting projects. Both the federal and state government understand that many landowners might not plant trees if there isn't some kind of a financial assistance to do that. And that's quite variable. There's a number of organizations, both the state organizations and federal. There's private industry, the wood industry. There's non-governmental organizations in some cases that will assist in the planting of trees, wildlife agencies, and on and on. And then the programs on the right is just an acronym. I mean, just an acronym of all kinds of programs that are out there, TAPE and EQIP and SPUB and so forth. So working with your professional forester, they're familiar with these various programs and can guide you in the one that can help pay for your project. Well, you want to order your seedlings, and I qualify that early, because seedlings oftentimes are available in the state nurseries starting about mid to late summer. And so this happens to be the East Tennessee nursery that you're looking at. But there's a lot of demand for these seedlings. And so you want to order them as quickly as you can once they become available. And be prepared to, when you develop your tree planting plan, have the preferred species, and then have off the side some possible substitutes, because you might want white oak, but maybe it's not available. And so you have to switch over to like northern red oak or cherry bark oak or something like that. So unless you want to go out to the private nurseries, of course, private nurseries have seedlings as well, and you might be able to find them there. So these can be ordered online or by phone. Work with your local state forester to help you with that. Well, you're going to need to hire a planting contractor. Again, this should be done earlier as well. There are crews that, particularly if it's pine, they start in the deep south and they kind of migrate northward as they plant trees as the spring advances. And so you want to get, on their docket as early as you can. Now, this happens to be hand planting. This is a hand planting crew, but sometimes trees are planted, of course, with a machine. And you'll notice here that this is the machine that the tree planting buckets are in the back, and the planter is sitting on a seat. You'll notice that bar coming off the front left side of the tractor. That's a spacing bar, and a chain will be dangling from the end of that bar so that the planter will maintain an even spacing as they're planting the field. This is more of a concern. Spacing is a concern of hand planting crews, because of course they're just kind of estimating, if it's a 10 by 10 spacing, how far the trees are within the row, how far apart, and how far apart the rows themselves are as well. So work with a planting contractor. Another example of a tree planting machine. This is one where the planter is actually encased inside this cover as well. And you'll see the time of the year that this is being planted. This would be late winter or very, very early spring. Well, some seedling planting best management practices. If key steps are not carefully followed during the handling and the planting, you're going to see your mortality rise. And so I want to discuss some things that you need to be thinking about to keep those seedlings in dormant state as long as possible. So you can begin with protecting the seedlings during vehicular transport. So here you are at the state nursery, and you're picking up your seedlings, and they're in these bags, and the bags are sealed off, and that's a good thing, protects them from wind. But it's good to put these seedlings in some kind of a trailer, whether it's enclosed with a tarp or enclosed like this horse trailer, and that protects them from the wind. And particularly this is important if it's a warmer, sunny day that you're picking these seedlings up, and if you have to travel a long distance. So protect the seedlings while they're in transport. Whether you're picking them up from the nursery or you're actually carrying them out to the tree planting site, they should be protected. Once you get the seedlings, now not everybody has a humidified cooler. Preferably, you'd like the seedlings to be ready to go in the ground as soon as you get them, so you don't have to store them. But that's not always the case. And so you might try to line up a cooler if somebody has one that perhaps is not being used. But if not, store the seedlings in some kind of a cool, dark place, like a cellar, perhaps even a basement, maybe the back end of a barn, something like that's as cool as possible, dark, and particularly also away from the wind, because again, that will dry the seedlings out. We'd like to store them, if you can, below 40 degrees, somewhere between about 35 and 40 degrees, to keep them from transpiring very rapidly. But of course, that's not always possible. They're pretty hardy for a while. Well, you want to plant the seedlings at the appropriate time of the year. And I like to say winter through very early spring. So you can see this is late winter. If you look at the way in the background, you'll see pine trees in the back, older pine trees, but you'll also see all these hardwoods are still dormant. So that tells us that we're probably in the February, March range when this was being planted. Notice these seedlings have been exposed, but that's to poke them in the ground quickly. You don't want to leave them out there out like this for long, And that's why these buckets are here, to protect the seedlings. Plant on cooler days and at cooler times of the day as well. And again, you want to try to avoid the wind. So if the temperature gets up around 70 degrees, you can still plant at that temperature, but you need to get them in the ground quickly. I always say it's really probably what's most important is that the soil moisture be fairly high, because we don't want to plant into dry soil, because that will pull moisture away from the roots and kind of get them off to a bad start. So you get into really high temperatures, windy days in the afternoon, you might want to cease and start again the next day. You want to treat the seedlings properly at the planting site. Now, you'll see this is a tree planting bag that fits around your waist where you can stuff seedlings down in. And that's important, not because it's handy for planting, but again, that protects the seedlings from wind and sun and so forth. And typically you'll be filling this bag up about every hour anyway. You'll plant the seeds and seedlings and then refill it. Tarps are good to protect the bags while you're on site. They even have tarps that are reflective tarps that actually reflect the sun's rays away and kind of insulates the seedlings. If you do a lot of tree planting, you might want to invest in something like that. Some tools for the trade. We've already discussed the tree planting machine. These are pretty quick. On good soil with good seedlings, you can plant up to 1,000 trees per hour, if not more in some cases, if they're long rows and a good speed. Hand planting tools, there's a number of them. You'll see in the lower left, there's two orange spade-like looking bars. The first on the left is called a dibble bar, and that's very common. The second is a tree planting bar. It's a little bit wider, and it's used for seedlings with bigger root systems in order to get the seedling in the ground. And then you'll see these hodads, also a favorable tool. Typically, these are used for pine, oftentimes in cutover areas where it's going back into pine. Now, the ones on the right, I'm really not a big fan of for planting trees, at least on a large scale basis for reforestation like we're talking about. The spade, of course, is very slow, and then the auger is going to be even slower. That's used typically for larger seedlings. And what I don't like about it is that as it bores into the ground, it tends to create kind of a clay pot and makes it difficult for the seedlings roots to penetrate that once they begin trying to grow out of that. So they have use, but it's not very economical for the type of tree planting that we're addressing today. Well, you're going to conduct a planting check as well. Feel sorry for these fellows planting in the water here, but it's a number of things you want to look for whether you're planting it yourself or you're observing or overseeing others that are planting it. Of course, we want the seedlings to be straight if at all possible, get them off to a good straight start. But even more important than that, we want them to be tight. Once they've been planted, we want them to be tight. So I like to actually tug on the seedling and make sure it's not loose. If it's planted with a tree planting machine, of course, the machine's heavy enough and those packing wheels will pack it in. But by hand, when planting by hand, it actually is tightened with the heel of your foot. And so we want to make sure that those air pockets have been compressed around the seedlings so that they don't dry out once the growing season begins. We want seedlings to be planted deeply, at least equal to the depth that they were planted while they were at the nursery. And this is noted by a darkened ring that occurs around, well, at the root collar. You can see where the soil line was at the nursery. So we want them at least that deep, if not slightly deeper. So it's better to plant these types of trees slightly deeper. That might not be the case in yard settings because there's a lot of settling that occurs from the organic matter in the pots that they plant the seedlings in. Obviously, we don't want to expose roots. In some cases, people hand planting, particularly with pine, they'll tend to cram the roots in, and sometimes you'll get what we call a J root to it. And we don't want that. We want the roots laying freely, kind of in a vertical fashion in the hole before they are compressed in. If it's J rooted up like this, of course, those roots will be pointed upward, and sometimes they'll actually be sticking out of the ground. And then, of course, part of your planting check should be to check for spacing. So if the original plan called for a 10 by 10, sometimes you have to watch tree planting crews because oftentimes they're paid by the unit or by the seedling. And so the faster they can plant the seedlings, the more money they can make. And there's a tendency sometimes to plant the seedlings too close together. And so you might end up with something like a 5 by 10 spacing, and that will cause you problems down the road because the trees will actually be too dense and have to be thinned out in order to reduce the stocking. Weed control is essential. Now, this happened to be seedlings that were already established. These were seedlings that were 2 years old, and this was sprayed with a backpack sprayer. But a lot of times these tree planting machines, I like to see a tree planting machine with a 100-gallon tank on the front of the machine, and that allows us to actually spray herbicide out the back of the planter once the seedling's been planted. And essentially, it's two operations in one. We're planting and spraying at the same time. But you want to get your seedlings off to a good start, avoid that competition. This is particularly important for the first 2 to 3 years. Allow the trees to get their heads up above the competing weeds, and then they're off and running. You don't have to spray them normally after that. Well, you want to conduct a survival check. Most likely your forester will be doing this. Generally, we seek about a 75 to 80% survival. Normally in hardwood plantings, unless your objectives are more for wildlife, I like to see a minimum of about 300 trees per acre, which is an average of about a 12 by 12 spacing. So if you plant a 10 by 10 with 435 trees per acre and you have some mortality, you can still maintain that 300 tree minimum before you would need to do some reinforcement planting. Well, remember, it's better not to have planted than to have planted incorrectly. So begin with a professional forester and a tree planting plan, and that will be your key to success. So again, I want to thank the Tennessee Department of Agriculture Division of Forestry for providing many of these slides that you've seen today. It's interesting, if you look at the photo off to the left, that's actually a hardwood plantation. I believe that's tulip poplar. And these trees appear to be about 20 years old. So you can see that you can have success. Notice all the undergrowth, which is very favorable for wildlife. And you've taken an open area, a field, perhaps pasture land, and planted it back to a healthy, productive forest. So that concludes today's session. I want to thank you. If you have the time and feel up to it, you can fill out a survey on that link. You can pause this if you'd like to write that down. Also, I developed a publication titled Tree Planting Procedure for Small Bare Root Seedlings. And here's the URL for that. Both of these will be posted back on the YouTube site. Otherwise, you could write these down, or you could even just Google my last name and that title, and you'll find the publication there. So thanks a lot, and good luck with your tree planting project. And remember, you're not necessarily planting trees for today, you're planting trees for tomorrow. So thank you.